Okay, I think it's time to talk about the Doge kids. And I gotta call them kids. I'm sorry. It's hard for me to see such naive inexperience being leveraged like a hatchet against experienced civil servants throughout the entirety of our government to cut so many people, whether it be at US aid, whether it be at food and health research, whether it be atomic energy safety people who were fired and then unfired after they figured out that people don't really like radiation poisoning is not a type priority for Americans to get, especially with this type of healthcare. Either way, I was not a huge fan of it at the time, as DOGE avoided Congress and avoided the power of the purse that was congressionally mandated to them, as Elon Musk, showing very little knowledge of the country that he has moved to and become a citizen of, continued to avoid Congress's mandate and Congress's congressionally always. It's not like this is a new power, the power of the purse. This is fundamental, okay? Reading is fundamental, darling. Read the Constitution. You have to. You have to. That's like some of the things you have to do on the citizenship test. Come on. Either way, they avoided the power of the purse, and they took a hatchet to U.S. aid. They took a hatchet to research and development, R&D. They took a hatchet to all sorts of long-term, decades of experience civil servants that even if another administration comes in and tries to hire those people back, and in some instances, our government went and did try to hire many of these people back, you know what they say? Fuck you. I gave up the best years of my life trying to give back to my country. Then my country gave me job and security. And now once they've realized my value, they've come crawling back to me when I can make more money in the private market, or I can go off to Europe and I can do research in France. I can do research in China. I can do research in Germany, or I can get a job in the private sector. And instead of having me who was doing this because they care, you're going to now have to pay more to somebody who doesn't and is going to be there just for the job security. There are people who appreciate the job security of the federal government, but how long can you sell that as a benefit if you're going to be hiring and firing people, and the people hiring and firing you are not even the people who are constitutionally mandated to be able to do that without congressional authority? You can't just go in, fire all these people after Congress has mandated that they get this budget, they get this department, they get to do that. You know what they used to do? If Republicans got power and they didn't like a department, they put somebody in charge of it who didn't like it. They didn't cut its throat and just let it bleed out in the street. They just put leadership in front of it who would rather do that, but they know they can't because they need Congress to do it. DOGE avoided that entirely. And now we're figuring out the people who led this were naive children. Naive children who are using shaky mandates to go after things like that were determined to be DEI. Now, what is and isn't DEI often landed in the interpretation of the individual person who was now trying to tackle government agencies and people who worked on behalf of those agencies with decades of experience. And these people with no knowledge in the field, no experience in that agency, we're having to make quick moment decisions about whether people who have held that job for decades really deserve to hold that job, or they got that job for no good reason. They got that job and it's a waste, and we're going to cut you. And Congress has no say in who stays and goes. And if they got that budget, too bad. And we're finding out that these people who got to go past Congress, who got to have access to a lot of Americans' private data, that none of them were given clearance to access and go through. We're finding out those people didn't exactly know what they were talking about. Let me show you a few videos from the deposition hearings that were happening, where they have these. Look at this guy. Look, I'm not trying to say if you're young, you can't be involved in politics, but the idea that somebody in their early 20s, through sycophancy to Elon Musk and getting in his inner circle and DOGE's inner circle, are able to avoid clearance through Congress to get highly sensitive data on Americans, that we have no clue if that leaked out to it could have. That data was accessed. We have no clue. Like the access points were were accessed by these people. They could have copied them on hard drives. They could have done any number of things. We have no fucking clue. But we gave them that access without clearance, with no good experience to justify the amount of access we were giving them, and then giving them immense power to decide the fate of people who work in my area. And the reason this pisses me off so much is a lot of the people they fired are like my neighbors. And I talked to them. I was like, oh, what did you do? Oh, I worked at like the, you know, the USDA, or, oh yeah, I worked with like atomic energy. Oh, I worked in research and development. I worked at, you know, the Nutrition Research Institute right down the road. And they've decided the federal government is just going to sell the entire building to Greenbelt in College Park, despite all of the innovations that it has been involved in, despite the fact that, you know, I think America should be at the head of RD, but screw that. Screw that. We can sell the property, cut the amount of civil servants. Anyway, the people who made these determinations don't really know what DEI is. Listen to this kid talk about it.
You don't regret that people might have lost important income to support their lives?
No. I think it was more important to reduce the federal deficit from $2 trillion to close to zero.
Did you reduce the federal deficit?
No, we didn't.
God damn.
This is a history of the HIV/AIDS prison movement and its legacies in the United States. My book project narrates how activists fought the convergence of HIV/AIDS and incarceration from inside and outside prisons across the Reagan through Clinton years, and argues that this organizing holds legacies in the prison abolition movement of the 1990s to today. This is one of the grants that you or Mr. Fox identified as craziest at NEH, is that right?
That's right.
Why did you identify this as one of the craziest grants?
Because it references feminist and queer insights into prison abolition and LGBTQ studies.
Any other reasons?
No.
Examining military service from the margins, the complicated service discussion series will bring together veterans and community members to examine the experiences of service members who identify themselves as female, Black, Native American, LGBTQ, or an immigrant, the dynamics, reasoning, and strength behind serving a country that does not always serve you in return. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
You and Mr. Fox identified this as one of the craziest grants at NEH?
Yes, it appears so.
Why did you do that?
Because it...
Mind you, this is supposed to be a stunning testimony. When I'm starting with, I'm not showing you the worst. I'm starting with the easy stuff. This is supposed to be, I have seen people post this to show that these people don't seem to really have anything to go after, which is, of course, my position on the matter. But from the other perspective, the other side of the aisle, they've looked at this and say, see, we are giving it the crazy stuff. That we're giving grants to have conversations with Black soldiers and immigrant soldiers about serving for a country that doesn't always serve them back. That's supposed, now to me, I don't think that's a crazy thing to be spent. I don't. I think that's a valid conversation to have, especially if you want to increase recruitment from these communities, and the American government has had recruiting problems when it comes to the armed forces of the United States, right? And I don't think that everybody is going to be motivated to service through the idea that they can get a Dodge Charger. Okay, I don't think that's going to be the main motivation for everybody. So you have to find other ways to convince people to serve. There's a reason as to why Congress would, you know, allocate funds and would end up going to something like this, right? But when I listen to this, this is the craziest they have. This is what we ended up gutting U.S. aid over the idea they were having conversations about, why would a Black soldier serve, considering America's history with Black people in the country? That conversation was happening was why we had to go from this to gutting U.S. aid. Because when you listen to them talk about what we cut, they always talk about like basking weaving in like Manitoba or something crazy, right? Or something that even sounds crazy. Like, oh, there was some research on shrimp. Then you find out that, a lot of crazy research on animals is how we end up curing cancer, end up curing all sorts of stuff. A lot of crazy research in the food you don't think is going to go anywhere ends up going forward, like huge leaps in health and fitness and wealth and, the wealth of life. But instead, this is the worst of the worst. So just to be clear, this is the worst.
Explicitly says LGBTQ.
So to be clear, it's DEI And it's one of the craziest because it says the words LGBTQ. Not because it said, you know, LGBTQ, we're going to tell you about queer theory, but to specifically say LGBTQ in a discussion with grant money, that's craziest.
Yes, it appears so.
Why did you do that?
Because it explicitly says LGBTQ.
Do you have any history in, like, let's say, scholarly peer review?
No.
Okay. So, but this judgment call was made by you and your personal judgment combined with Justin's personal judgment to cancel grants based on DEI.
Yes.
Okay. Do you think it's inappropriate in any way that someone in their 20s with no experience with grants or federal government was making personal judgment calls about what grants to cancel?
No, I don't think it's inappropriate.
Okay. Why not?
I think a person can have enough judgment from reading books and being well informed outside of traditional experience to make judgment calls about obvious things like a grant that literally lists DEI in its description to know whether it violates an executive order.
I'm sorry. I'm saying books because you said books. What books would you have read that would have informed your opinion on what grants to cancel based on DEI or not?
There were no books.
There were no books. So to be clear, these were the people making determinations on what's DEI and what's not and what got gutted. Now, we have entire departments like what happened with USAID that has been shut down. To say USAID was DEI or USAID violated an executive order, USAID was given money by Congress. USAID shouldn't have been shut down, but the Trump administration did it anyway because they felt that they could get away with it. And DOGE ended up being the weapon that took down USAID. And then whatever areas of aid in the world and soft power that could have been grabbed by other powers were, and whatever people that were dropped by our health initiatives, many of them ended up dying. And so the idea is that they only went after like woke basket weaving is not true when many of them were health initiatives throughout Africa. Just because it's something that says, oh, you know, we could end up giving this for people of HIV. Oh, this is some queer stuff. You know, HIV is like a really big issue in much of Africa. And it's not just going to be queer people. And also, even if it is queer people, it's not like their lives don't matter. But the way it's being talked about to discuss LGBTQ, that is DEI, it must be gutted. USAID as a concept must be gutted, despite the fact that most of it, what it did was giving out aid. It was not DEI fucking basket weaving initiatives. And when you have such a loose definition of what DEI is, you can end up gutting whatever you want to based on your personal, naive, inexperienced judgment, and then having to rehire people like they had to because of your ignorance. These next 4 minutes, and this is not something I regularly do. I want to contribute. I don't want to steal. I don't want to take other people's content and make it into my own, but let's be clear, this is not content, this is a deposition. And so I wanted to play you guys 4 minutes of uninterrupted a testimony from one of these DOGE dickweeds, one of these people who are given much more authority than they should have in our government. Here is 4 minutes of somebody trying to define what DEI is, what they know about DEI after they purge tons of civil servants based upon, and grants, canceled grants, based upon their determination on what was and wasn't DEI. Where is it? I know I have it here. Epic Fury. No, this isn't it, but this is a good clip too.
We must stop the terror. I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
Okay, sorry. Interrupted daily programming with Bush. Here's the clip.
How do you interpret DEI? There was, the EO explicitly laid out the details.
I don't remember it off the top of my head.
It's okay. I'm asking for your understanding of it.
Yeah, my understanding was exactly what was written in the EO.
Okay. So can you?
I don't remember what was in the EO.
So right now, do you have an understanding of what DEI is?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's your understanding as you sit here today in this deposition?
Well, it was exactly what was written in the EO. And so anytime that we would look at a grant through the lens of complying with an executive order, we would just refer back to the EO and assess if this grant had relation to it.
Okay. But I guess I'm stepping back from your methodology strictly in terminating the grants. Do you have an understanding as you sit here today of what DEI means?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's your understanding of what it means?
Well, it is exactly what was written in the EO.
Okay, so
and I don't have the EO in front of me, but that was we would always reference back to the EO and make sure that this grant was in compliance with the EO.
I understand that. Okay, but I'm not asking necessarily about.
Oh, I hate to interrupt this. I just want to throw out there, the judge in this case ordered that all these videos, the videos I'm showing you right now, the video that's currently on the screen, the video that we're currently listening to, watching, you can see his half-lidded, completely thoughtless eyes. These videos were to be taken down. Apparently they weren't supposed to be posted. And so he said, nah, burn them, burn them, burn them, delete, delete, delete. And so I'm watching all the YouTube videos just kind of disappear right now. So I'm happy I got these clips downloaded before this stream started. Woo! My goodness. God bless the hard drive. Remember, download everything. Download everything.
That was we would always reference back to the EO and make sure that this grant was in compliance with the EO.
I understand that. Okay, but I'm not asking necessarily about what was in the EO. I'm asking very specifically about your present understanding of what of DEI. Do you have a present understanding of DEI?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you explain what that present understanding is?
Well, it's just easier for me to be referencing back to the EO.
Are you refusing to answer the question?
I'm not refusing to answer the question.
Okay.
I just feel that referencing back to the verbatim executive order was the best way for us to capture all of the DEI language. And so I think giving a high-level overview of what I could relay as DEI is not going to do justice what was written in the EO.
And that's okay. We can look at the EO as well.
Great.
I'm asking you for, I mean, this is a deposition. I'm asking you questions. You're under oath. So you're required to answer them. So what is your understanding of what DEI means?
Well, I think I would say, again, that I would go back to the EO to make sure I'm capturing enough. I don't feel comfortable saying a high-level overview because it is such a big bucket, and there's just a lot of pieces of the puzzle.
What's a part of the bucket?
Gender fluidity, sort of promoting, promoting subsets of LGBTQ plus that might alienate another part of a community. Again, it was just easier for us to reference back into the EO.
Okay, so...
And I don't want to give you a broad overview because it's like, at the end of the day, it is capturing, it is all-encompassing in the EO. It's how we did our methodology.
Right. Do you always refer to EOs to gain an understanding of words used in your typical daily vernacular?
Objection.
What do you mean?
You say that you have an understanding of what DEI means, and when I ask you, you say you need to reference the EO. Do you need to reference EOs to define every word you use in your everyday life?
Objection.
No.
Okay, so what's stopping you from defining DEI to your understanding as you sit here today on January 28th, 2026?
It wouldn't be capturing enough of how big the topic is. DEI is very broad.
Look, that person might be very nice in the personal life, but that person should not be making any determination about any grant ever. First person shouldn't, and the second person shouldn't. Not only is there a question about whether they should have had the authority to do it in the first place, whether these people are to be trusted with access to people's private information, whether these people know how to interpret executive orders, whether they would know the bounds of an executive order and what they can and cannot do when it comes to congressional power of the purse, whether these people have the experience with grants to know how to do this properly. And the answer to whether they did is no. If people were fired and then rehired, that means that they did not do it properly. And in 3 years, I find it very likely that a bunch of people are going to have to be rehired, and many will not be rehired, and decades of experience for many of our institutions will be lost purely because these young people just swung way above their pay grade, way above their realm of experience, way above their knowledge in the fields that they were firing and cutting grants around. And way above anywhere they should have even been when it comes to a public position, an unelected public position. Nobody voted for these kids. They voted for their congressman. And their congressman didn't get to have a say, but these people did? Why? Because they're in proximity to the richest person on the planet? That's not how regulation should work. That's not how our civil institution should work. The richest man on the planet should not be making the determinations, or his inexperienced staff, about how executive orders around grants are and are not interpreted. And this is the result of inexperienced naivety, naivete. The language of my forefathers is my biggest enemy. That is all pushed to the side if loyalty and an ability to follow orders is prioritized. That's why these people were put in their position. Not because they are good at their job, but because they listen. And that's why these videos sound like a bunch of yes man behavior or an inability to explain one's actions. Don't know how. They walked back from their conclusion. Hope Danabo loves editing this.